What is up, guys? Today we are going to watch What If Altist. What if the Central Powers won World War One? We're going to get into it right now. Some quick context though. Who is What If Altist? He's a YouTube channel with like over 500,000 subscribers, and he's like all with this really tough sociology, anthropology, history types of videos. This is a slightly older one, 3 years ago, and it's just a kind of looking into the structure of how it was back then. So yeah, we're gonna just get into it right now. Yeah.
The ranking of the most important wars in history, World War I would be a serious competitor for the first place. World War I was the culmination of over 1,000 years of European history, of the military competition between the different European powers, trying to become the next Roman Empire and killing each other while at the same time sparking technology.
So how everyone viewed itself as the heirs of Rome in World War One, the third Rome, and Tsar is a derivation of Caesar, derived from Roman Empire. Yeah, that is pretty true. They see themselves as like the ex-Holy Roman Empire. Kaiser, correct pronunciation of Caesar. Yep. And then Italy is creating an empire to recreate. So they want to recreate the glory of Rome and the Italian, race. Any French history book of this era will bang it into your head that France is the true heir to Rome. Yeah, so a lot of these areas, France is the most progressive democracy of the ancient Rome. And well, they're just kind of like one of the titles is Rome or Sultan, the Romans. They're all saying how they're the next generation for Rome. They're all fighting. It's kind of like a Game of Thrones or, some kind of Are You the Father?
Technological innovation. At the same time, it also set the direction for much of the next 100 years. Directly or indirectly, it resulted in the Soviet Union, the Great Depression, the Second World War, decolonization, the Cold War, and American hegemony. Thus,
That is 100% true. World War One affected the entire world. I think it probably made more changes than World War Two, in my opinion. Just because if you think about it, World War Two, what does it happen if Hitler wins? Well, you just get, the complete opposite world. Meanwhile, if World War Two, World War One was different in any way. Like, so many other changes could have happened. Meanwhile, in World War Two, you know, there's only like three big scenarios if you make a bunch of changes. Meanwhile, World War One could have like hundreds of different results.
if you were to change the effects of the First World War, you would change most of the direction of the 20th century in general. So, what would have happened if the First World War had gone the opposite way? What if the Kaiser's Germany had won? How would that have affected borders, demographics, culture, wars in the modern world? That is the question of this alternate history.
And my biggest question, would it be a better world if Germany won? I know, before some people say, oh, that sounds really stupid to ask. I'm actually curious. If the Kaiser won World War One, would we live in a much, much better world? Like, I'm actually, honestly, I think it could be a better world, because think about this. If Germany won World War One, you wouldn't have seen so many killings of the Jews. Over time, you would have gotten a slightly more progressive Germany, so they probably would still have the conservative values without, the far right evil that can never come in, right? So we would probably have a better Germany, right? And not only that, but we probably wouldn't have things like, the modern day liberalism and communism, which have poisoned our world. Don't get me wrong, there would probably be a lot of awful things, but in my opinion, something like that. Now, yeah, there would be communism and syndicalism and all that. That stuff might still be around, but I'm saying, like, it probably wouldn't be that popular, and most likely Russia would just collapse due to, losing the war and becoming so destroyed. Ukraine was very major. It kind of contained the breadbasket. Losing Ukraine would most likely kill millions of Russians, put them in mass starvation. Yeah! An ego trip in which I vomit my reading list back at you. Man. Getting Germany to win.
was a remarkably close-fought war, and there were several points in which the Central Powers, or Germany, if we're being real, was very close to total victory. In general, with Russia knocked out of the war and Britain island, a German victory would have come in the form of the seizure of Paris. There were 2 points in which this almost occurred, with the German army only a stone's throw away from.
Okay, so sieging Paris would most likely make them make the greatest change out of everything, because The reason why is it would have been the greatest morale destroyer of France. If they took Paris, if the Germans were able to take Paris, that would not only show that they were able to take Paris not once but twice within just like a 50-year range, it also would kill their capital, the main place, right, the grand location. And even if you deal with the millions of people living around the area resisting, like it would probably destroy the morality. Probably some of them would identify as German in Paris now that they see how many times they keep on getting kidnapped by the Germans. Or kidnapping is the wrong word, just like being occupied. Yeah, like I think the biggest one is what if just Belgium allowed them to pass through? That I think would be the greatest change because on one hand, you would have probably the quickest war. Literally, that would be the Germany's best case scenario for anything. You don't have to overcomplicate it, or just say, what if Belgium sided with the Germans? That's kind of it. Just lets them pass. Belgian neutrality is broken, but Belgium decided that, so it's not like Britain would just join in. Most likely, Britain would probably join in, but by then, France would probably lose Paris and everything they had. And then Germany, most likely, would have won. You just take out France and then just deal with Russia's crumbling apart, along with more of the divisions going there. Just saying, that's probably the best case scenario for them, but most likely Belgium would not have done that.
French capital. The first of which was in 1914, and the second in 1918. Both of these are plausible places from which the Germans could win the war. However, I'm going to go with the German victory in 1918. This is because everyone was still optimistic in 1914, while in 1918, everyone was a walking corpse. Having a 1914 point of departure and ending the war a couple of years earlier,
the cultural effects of World War I were far greater than the political. You think I'm gonna read this all? Hell yeah, I am. The Western social and intellectual code that existed for centuries, shrouded by the leadership, effing up the war so badly, World War I combined with the Holocaust, resulting in Western civilization losing complete. Yeah, that is 100% true. This created the decline of religion, the rise of social justice, the rise of authoritarian dictatorships, less racism. Yeah, that's the only good one, but at the same time, I think racism would have lowered over time anyway. Lower class culture, yeah, such as rock and roll, rap jeans, etc. World War I had never happened in the West. Would be. Yeah, that I think I agree with that one too. Where like lower classes, like if even if you look at the 1960s, drip was known as disgusting. Now you're like, I got that drip. I think that's one example. And then, back then, rock and roll, rap, jeans, it was just kind of the stuff that would be really you know, antisocial. I think is a good word, right? That they were wanting to do their own thing, kind of away from the society, and it was, I don't really like. Yeah, I don't really like them all that well. I mean, I love rock and roll and rap. I love jeans. I think that stuff's good. I just don't like how it's now today. I don't like the how it is nowadays and how they kind of ruin that stuff. But I think how it started off with, I don't think was 100% bad.
would have gotten rid of all of World War I's effects on Western civilization as a whole, rather than merely just having a German victory. That's a separate video. Similarly, all the great powers were still capable of fighting in 1914. The French, with their entire code of heroism, would have likely moved their capital to Bordeaux and kept fighting with Paris lost. Similarly, Britain would keep its normal game of still fighting to keep the continent from becoming unified that it always does. In 1918,
the problem is if you conquer Paris, you get the rest of the plateau, which is very flat in France. So once you kind of just steamroll to Paris, you can just go all the way through. That's the problem. I noticed because I was playing as Germany and I did the exact same thing. I brought back like the Kaiser in Hearts Around 4, and I did this. Or no, that I was still Nazi Germany, but I invaded Belgium and Netherlands, and then I just steamrolled through once I took Paris.
Everyone was still barely functioning. If Germany had seized Paris, the British and the French would have immediately given up, creating a cleaner victory for me to work with. The biggest way to allow the Germans to win 1918 would be to prevent America from entering the war. It's a hugely controversial argument over whether America turned the tide of the war, but it almost certainly did. To list some effects, the entrance of America into the war was what broke the French army's mutiny. The U.S. troops were the last line of defense that kept the Germans from winning their spring 1918 Kaiserschlacht offensive, an offensive that was done on desperate timing to try to wipe out France before the U.S. could enter the war. It was widely known that once the U.S. was able to fully mobilize, it could quickly outnumber all the other powers on the Western Front, and thus the arrival of Americans in mass number was a big reason Germany surrendered. The United States had a naturally isolationistic temperament in this era. If Germany had not maintained submarine warfare, which actually did not seem to have turned the tide of the war, as well as the completely idiotic Zimmermann telegram to Mexico.
Yeah, for those who don't know, the Zimmermann telegram was when Germany sent oh, I remember that. So they sent this invitation to Mexico to declare war on the U.S. in return, give them some western states. That most likely, yeah, no, Mexico had a 0% chance of beating America. Let's just say Mexico declares war on America. Like, they get immediately destroyed. The whole thing gone. Mexico is nowhere near the level of the United States. I don't think they can even take on Texas alone. Like, I've seen simulations. Texas can beat Mexico alone. And then the British caught it and sent it over to America. Yeah, and that's kind of started the whole, like, problem
The
there.
U.S. would never have joined the war against Germany. The warmongering President Woodrow Wilson would have been overruled by the isolationist Republicans controlling Congress. Without the U.S. in the war, the Germans would never have been in a rush to use their new troops, freed up by the defeat of Russia, to immediately wipe out Paris. Instead, they'd be able to wear down the Allies' attacks.
Tanks are a complicated factor, and so they gave the Allies a large offensive edge, and Germans did make tanks in our timeline, and if the Allies were successful with them. So, like,
by fighting a defensive campaign, and then launch brutal.
They also were the innovators of the entire world. Like, think about this. They made some of the best tanks. In fact, I think Germany made the best tank in the entire world. Was it like the Panzer or the Tiger? Like one of the two. They, some of the tanks they made, like we use them today. In the Civil War era, a lot of the Germans built us our stuff. Einstein, German Jewish. He got us, all the good technology, like the helping with the nuclear bombs, and with Oppenheimer, German Jewish. Just saying, like a lot of Germans were very smart and innovative people, and a lot of huge tech geniuses and like infrastructure. They were the industrial power. Why do you think they were the fastest growing in industry? They built factories, built machinery, weaponry, all that type of stuff. Germans are really good at that stuff, and it wasn't just in World War One. Not even in just World War Two, but you could notice how they've been. Like, look at modern day Germany. I mean, yeah, they've been doing that for a very long period of time.
Counterattacks, causing enormous damage to the British and then seizing Paris from the French.
Oh, by the way, that's no longer St. Petersburg. They changed it to, what was it, like Volgograd? And then later on, Leningrad, to sound less German.
With both France and Britain bled to the bone, they would surrender to German conditions. World War I was a horrifying war in which the population suffered a huge amount, and unlike many wars in history, the public's opinion actually mattered. Thus, the defeat terms came out really brutal for both sides, since the public demanded revenge for all their dead sons, brothers, and comrades. That's why the Versailles Treaty of our timeline was so brutal.
Media effects.
Germany would likely enact a similar treaty, with the enemy empires likely divided in a manner similar to this map. In our timeline, slight choices in the Versailles Treaty affected politics decades down the road, and so we'll go through the important border shifts to see what would happen. Starting in the West, the Germans supported the Irish Easter Rising, and in an attempt to reward their allies and weaken the British, would give the entirety of Ireland to the Irish rebels. The enormous difference in wealth and the religious divide meant the Catholics would oppress the majority Protestant population of the North. The Protestants would form their own militias and terrorist forces to resist the Catholics, while migrating en masse number to likely Australia or more so Canada, making an even more Scottish region. Germany would push its border west, seizing wealthy and port-heavy Belgium, while pushing its border a bit west into France as well. However, the largest changes would be in the east. It's surprisingly obscure among the normal population, but Germany had taken over most of Eastern Europe from the Russians. Obscure
Yeah.
among the
So in this channel, I always struggle whether to gear it towards casual history fans and hardcore nerds. I would say casual history fans. You don't have to go all crazy with it.
normal population, but Germany had taken over most of Eastern Europe from the Russians in the final years of World War I. They had to give it up due to the peace treaty, but it was a huge region. The Germans
Do you know how much land that was? I made a video about it a long time ago. I was saying how this land was super major. Ukraine, like I said before, was a breadbasket. They had like huge amounts of food. In fact, Ukraine alone was, if you look at the statistics of when they were feeding Africa, Ukraine was able to share a huge amount of its food to Africa. Just Ukraine alone could probably outdo Russia in that turn, in that stuff. The Ukraine plateau and the flat, beautiful land just makes it very, very accessible to grow a lot of crops and to have a lot of bread and wheat. So there's that advantage. Then the Baltics, right? Like they're all coastline, so you can be able to build a lot of ships. It's just really good land. And then I don't really know much about the middle part of it, but there's rivers, areas, maybe some decent population, but also contain huge amounts of not just people, but also large amounts of resources and coastline. You need the coastline to the oceans, like Crimea, for example. That's a major area, especially Sevastopol. Sevastopol is very major because like you could build like it created a massive naval advantage. Now Russia probably lost the areas where they can have the best navies.
were planning on settling this region and turning it into a German economic colony. The Kaiser's Germany wasn't a nice state by any margin, but it didn't have the genocidal tendencies of the later Nazis. The
Yeah.
Germans directly succeeded this by migrating many Germans east and integrating the economy of Eastern Europe into Germany. This would drastically increase Germany's resources.
Oh, yeah, that makes 100% sense. If do settlementation, overpopulate it to, your ethnic group, that definitely helps out. But I don't think the German Empire would try and, like, murder them all because here's the thing. Then if they were, making genocide towards them all, they would all just join in with Russia again and rebel. They just got these areas. They need to be as kind as possible and really careful with these areas.
And sizes of power. Meanwhile, the Germans had only slightly less ambitious claims for their colonial empire. They wanted to combine their colonies in Tanzania and Cameroon to make a Mittel Africa, which would involve taking land from the Belgian Congo and French Gabon, and possibly even British North Rhodesia and Nyasaland. The Japanese were part of the Allies, but at heart opportunists, who were allies since Britain and France were the preeminent naval powers in their region. However, if the Allied cause was falling apart, they would immediately shift to the Central Powers and use it as an opportunity to poach the weaker colonies off them.
Wow, wow, Japan really just switches up like that. They're kind of like the Prussia of Asia.
Japan would seize French Indochina and Hong Kong in the final months of the war. The Austro-Hungarian Empire would be in a bit of a pickle. It was already too big for its own boots, with countless ethnic groups that were trying to secede, but it was also surrounded by dangerous neighbors that could only be kept down by force. For example, Serbia, which is an independent power funded terrorism, would have to be kept in line by force. Venice and Italy would likely be militarily occupied by Austria for several years before returning it to Italy. This would be solved by giving Bulgaria, a member of the Central Powers, a whacking big chunk of the Balkans and create a greater Bulgaria so they could hold down as much land as they could. Austro-Hungary would militarily...
Let's go. I feel so bad for Bulgaria. You know why? Because they've been pushed around. They tried to fight a war against everyone who betrayed them. And guess what? They got beaten up and hurt really badly. Now it's starting, to go well for them. They're starting to, bring themselves back up.
Militarily occupy Romania and parts of Serbia to keep them subservient while trying to split and divide and conquer, perhaps splitting Romania between Wallachia and Moldova. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had a great division between the regions run by the Austrians and the Hungarians. This is why the Poles, who were under Austrian rule, viewed it as one of their golden ages, while the Croats, under Hungarian rule, viewed it as an era of pain and oppression. The Austrian part of the empire generally wanted to democratize and spread power among the ethnic minorities, while the Hungarians viewed this as an attack upon their honor. After the weakness of the empire had been shown by the war, the Austrians would have pushed the empire to civil war against the Hungarians over reforming it. A civil war the Germans would involve themselves in order to support their puppet. Austro-Hungary would reform with the German army as the main thing preventing the state from falling apart. The Ottoman Empire is like a runner who made it so close to the end goal, but then passed out and died 5 feet before the finish line. This is because the nation was reforming, actually quite effectively before World War I, and becoming a modern country. Also, the empire was just about to discover an enormous deposit of oil under their territory. The immense amount of oil in this territory would allow the Ottoman state to survive and even fund Turkey's industrialization. Turkey might have succumbed to Dutch disease, in which a natural resource.
This is where the oil money creates inflation, which hurts the working class as well as raising the cost of currency. Yeah, that's hurting exports.
But I honestly think the Young Turks would have reinvested into the military and economy, thus making Turkey a much greater power. With Russia and
I think Turkey would have a great opportunity. Like the Ottomans, they could have became still relevant. I had a lot of hope for them, but unfortunately, it was over for them.
Revolution due to its civil war, the Turks would have pressed further into the Caucasus, like they did in our timeline, seizing modern Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Chechnya.
No. Keep Ottoman Empire. How could that be? If today we still have the Ottoman Empire around, an empire that's been around since like 1300. I meant that would honestly be pretty cool. Maybe even earlier. I think like the Ottomans were like 1200.
Without the Russians to protect them in eastern Armenia, the Armenians would be driven to near extinction by the Turks, with only their diaspora surviving. Russia is a hard call. It seems easy to imagine that Germans would have intervened in the civil war between the communists and non-communists by helping the non-communists win. However, I think after fighting such a bloody and horrifying war as World War I, that the Germans would be content with consolidating the wealthier part of Russia rather than invading Russia again to disturb the balance of power in the Civil War. They would also possibly think that there was less a chance the communists would be as strongly anti-German as the Russian nationalists that dominated the anti-communists. The Soviet Union would still exist in this world. Reparations were the dumb thing in this era, with the wars of German unification being the prime example of this. In fact, the US not placing reparations on Germany and Japan.
I don't fully agree with this. The Germans, they had plans. They were prepared in case things went wrong because they knew how dangerous the communists were. In their preparations, they had a secret army ready to just invade if Lenin did something too insane. So most likely, Lenin would probably be murdered and everyone would probably, like all the communists would die before Civil War, or sorry, not Civil War, before a revolution even began. So just before anything began, probably Lenin would die. Especially with the Germans' money, they could just offer money to a random guy to shoot Lenin. Like that. I mean, there's so many other things that can happen. If Lenin just died, I would have changed everything alone, because that would have probably destroyed the communists. Or Trotsky, the two geniuses. They were very incredible. Even killing Stalin, just any of those three, that probably would have helped them enormously.
Japan after World War II was a bit of a shock. Thus, Germany likely request financial payments from Britain and France as onerous as those levied on Germany in our war.
By the way, it was a little more than that. Today's standards, I believe it would be like 200 billion.
With a colonial empire and reparations, Germany would become a fabulously wealthy nation, with Cologne or Frankfurt likely becoming financial centers as big or bigger than New York. By the end of the First World War, in real terms, Germany was a military dictatorship, with the Kaiser losing more and more power to generals like Falkenhayn and Hindenburg. With the return of peace, things would likely return more to normal. A bizarre political...
Yeah, but the Kaiser would have won, so, that's how people would have seen it. So therefore, the Kaiser probably would be a way more popular, and most likely, military dictatorship wouldn't be so extreme. Yes, they were, pretty hardcore right-winging, but at the same time, I think they understood, not going too far. You know, they're not stupid. That's my point. They're gonna be careful. Maybe not military dictatorship, but maybe at the border of that. I could kind of agree with that. But I think the Kaiser would still be around.
Political system would likely develop, one that's hard to describe in our timeline's terminology since it hasn't really existed. The military and traditional aristocracy it represented would gain an enormous degree of power, while the emperor and parliament would maintain a certain degree. The economy would become more directed and more of a welfare state would be created due to the war's example of what big
I always feel like there are all sorts of political ideologies that could have been oddly popular if they picked up enough steam. For example, Christian socialism. Yeah, that one's an interesting one. Since I'm a Christian and I'm not really popular with socialism, like I don't really like the system. I also think, like, as much as I think it sounds a little dumb, but could have happened. I gotta see what if Christian socialism did become popular. We need to see a video like that. It was a popular movement around the turn of the 20th century, but since the Marxists were so abundant with it, about atheism and sidelined. However, the vast majority of people in Western societies were devout Christians, and the hard Christian message of Jesus preached it is quite socialist with enormous emphasis on donation support. Yeah, but at the same time, Jesus said a lot about stuff like you gotta be doing this on with your own choices, and he didn't say how government should force it. So no, I don't think Jesus was socialist. I think you just have to be really biased if you wanted to, like, if you actually thought socialism would be something Jesus would advocate. Because on one hand, why was communism anti-religious? Well, it's because one example is that the government was supposed to be the thing you bow to, and then soon after, it'd be workless, or well, classless, moneyless society where you shouldn't even have religion. Everyone just lives, whatever. But they were mad because their people were focusing on other things. That's why Karl Marx hated it. Socialism kind of goes against Christianity, but you know what? It's whatever. And then similarly, a right-wing state with big government seems quite plausible. Big government to support the people and national glory, and does social spending to maintain social and traditional values. Yeah, but like, what country would even do that? Germany? You really think Germany would do that? Well, like, would they would never advocate for socialism. Probably French. France, Britain would not. No country would. Maybe like Romania. I don't know, just some random country. But I don't think it would be any of the big countries.
government was capable of. However, this would not be a left-wing state. It would be a strongly conservative nationalist right-wing one.
Interwar years.
The Great Depression would still have happened for reasons quite complex that I didn't have the time to explain.
So recessions are caused by disbalance between our expectations of the economy, stock market, and the actual economy. This happens when too much of the world economy is placed on a single field, and the field isn't capable of delivering on the expectations. This happened in 2008 when too much expectation was placed on the American housing market of deindustrialization. How did relative to the average American terms of the house? Recession caused too much expectation being placed on the industrial American economy while most of the rest. Yeah, World War One caused the Great Depression. That's 100% fact, honestly. We wouldn't have gotten a Great Depression because, like, right after people got World War One over with, they were all like, starting to become kind of like how it was in the 20s. It became golden 20s was because of World War One, and that made everyone be like partying and kind of ignoring things, and soon they kind of had too much expectation over the economy, and then soon it crashed, which, I mean, it makes sense. Sad it happened to them, but like at the same time, so many of them were very, very reckless with it. And due to reparation and debt payments, Britain and France would decay economically and greedy, and thus creating too much pressure on the German or American economies. Keynesians with kickstart wars can kickstart. If you win a war very easily, I think that is the economic boom. But if you're spending all of your resources, it doesn't really help. Wars lead to recessions when the wars coming by dividing the world system of economic repression. The defeating side will win the point on course. Wars can lead to economic booms, either when the victor exploits the defeated side to expand their economy, panic wars, and French War, or by creating a global system that will World War II attacks Rome.
But if you care, pause on this. Either the Cologne or New York stock markets would collapse with a worldwide recession.
I really hate how economics only focuses on the last 50 years, which has been a bizarre historical aberration caused by the Pax Americana and technological growth and project that into the future. One of the main flaws of our era of history, which could possibly lead to our collapse, is that we assume we're above the rules of history since our era of history is special. I agree. Like, this has always been a thing. In 1800, someone was probably like, "Oh yeah, we're special. We're greater than everyone in the past." Did you see how people were back in 1750? Oh, they're so stupid.
Similarly to our timeline of Germany, Britain and France had faced the brunt of it, with them struggling to pay off reparations while maintaining their economies. World War I was so traumatizing that the nations that won faced existential crises, while the nations that lost or even fought.
The political nations that lost World War One, yeah, they became blue right-wing dictatorships, left-wing dictatorships, right-wing from Western view, left from Islam.
They lost became horrifying tyrannies. A good side of this would be that Germany would have maintained a much more humane government under the Kaiser without having
Yep.
launched the war.
Yes. I have nothing else to say.
Interesting side note, without the Nazis, a huge amount of Jewish talent would have never fled to the US. Figures like Henry Kissinger, Albert Einstein, and likely others would have served the Reich. Japan turned authoritarian partially since they thought they deserved more colonies and respect from the white powers for being a great nation and their service in the First World War. Also, their relatively small size and need to import all their natural resources really hurt them in the Great Depression. Thus, in this timeline, the rise of the military to complete dominance of government would never have taken place, with the power balance between the army, parliament, and emperor, sort of like Thailand, I guess. The bad side of all of this is that Britain and France would probably turn fascist or nationalist. As a rule, when they pick authoritarian governments,
Nations that became fascist of their own violation, nations that became communist of their own leaving out so fascist. Yeah, I can kind of understand.
develop
And I remember Spain almost became communist in their civil war.
nations go for fascism, while primitive ones go for communism. However, the essence of fascism is that it pulls in the native folkways of the country it's in.
In general, if you know how one communist regime behaves, so that there's a certain degree of variation, you can predict how other communist regimes behave. Communist regimes could have purges of anti-communists followed by different groups that could challenge a leader. Bro, why do you have to spill all this out? This is hard to read. They need collectivists. The land and go through a famine, close their borders to the outside world, build a cult personality, and remain generally militarily isolationist, except if there's a threat moderately close to their borders. This is really strange since communism has existed in nearly every continent among wildly different geographic cultures, with the common thread being the teachings of Marx. Fascism has no central profit, and it's all about nationalism and pulling on other traditions. This is why Engels was very nationalist, and Hitler was very imperialist. Japan and Germany were genocidal, while no such tendencies existed among Spain, really. For example, although Spain is often considered fascism, reality behaved more like an industrialized feudal state.
It thus has a greater degree of internal variation
with the aristocracy mostly in charge rather than
inside fascism than communism. There's this alternate history series written by Harry Turtledove, where the South wins the Civil War and the American South becomes a fascist dictatorship. He just copy and pasted the Nazis, which seems pretty lazy since there's a large degree of variation inside the fascist world, and
I think America probably wouldn't be that fascist. Like, even if you got the most extremist right-wing people, a lot of them do really respect the how like American tradition values are, and like the idea with the document of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. People still have a lot of respect for that, so most likely dictatorship may not exist. Why do you think like when the Confederacy happened, they were all much more lower small state, and they were much more on the tendency to be Confederacy, so like very very anti big government, anti government in general. They're all for the states, and I feel like that's kind of what would happen. It depends on which states, though. Like, I think if New York became independent because they were so left leaning, they would most likely go socialist and become left leaning, but maybe not full on dictatorship. Yeah, and the argument that a country is too civilized for dictatorships. Dictatorships happen all the time. I just think it depends who are you referring to, because America is very distinct in ideology. Maybe the leftists will ignore the Constitution if they do take over the world. You know what I mean? Like, they don't really have as much respect as what the right wingers, far right has a lot more respect for the Constitution, no matter how much dictatorial they might be. However, they could ignore it. I'm just saying most of them probably would. Put a little more, like maybe take less of it, less serious.
an American take on fascism would almost certainly be different from the German one. France had a strong conservative, monarchist, Catholic, militarist, nationalist movement always bubbling slightly underneath the surface. This could have seized power if France was humiliated by Germany, with France becoming exceptionally reactionary and militaristic, with possibly them putting a relative of the Bonapartes on the throne in order to recreate Napoleon's glory. Britain's long history as a democracy means I'm not sure if they'd become a full fascist or totalitarian state. However, democracies can often become tyrannies of the masses, with a hard-right party being elected to continually win elections and maintaining power, propagating illiberal results, sort of similar to Narendra Modi's India today. They would likely maintain British nationalism, the glory of the empire, the need to maintain...
Please don't do that. You're good at many things. That's not one of them.
the Anglo-Saxon race. Britain, France, and Russia would all have enormous grievances
That's psychology and important
against the
religion.
Germans, with emotionally important regions of their empires taken from them they would need to reconquer. They would all form an alliance against the German Central Powers.
Part 3, World War II.
For all
Ooh.
of these reasons above, there would still be a World War II, albeit
Except France is the evil Nazi dictatorship. In my opinion, I think they might probably be communist leaning. Like, if you look at France, how they were already kind of communist leaning for a long time, I think they probably would be communist. And in Britain, I feel would be, yeah, they probably would also be communist. Most likely, they would be communist dictatorships, in my opinion, at least. I don't think they would be nationalistic at all.
different from our worlds. With the last war being so closely fought, the Turks would have likely stayed neutral and tried to supply oil to both sides, but it's possible they could have been dragged into the war at a later date to the Central Powers side. Japan, run by moderates and less by insane militarists who felt the need to keep invading for national glory, would not have gotten involved in the greater European war, and instead would have concerned themselves with the conquest of China. The Russians, French, and British would launch a large offensive on Germany. It's difficult to predict the war in its totality, but when all is said and done, a few variables would lead to a German victory. Firstly, Germany would have an enormous size advantage. Most of Eastern Europe and the wealthiest and most populous regions of Russia, alongside the Low Countries, would be in German hands. The Germans were nearly able to go toe-to-toe with the Western powers in both world wars in our timeline as just Germany, and so giving them more territory would make them even more powerful. Secondly, it seems unlikely the United States would have gotten involved in a war. The US has an enormous preference for the UK as an ally due to the ancestral and cultural affiliation. With the UK as an aggressive militaristic state, it would turn off the naturally isolationist America. Similarly, without Hitler's rabid racial views, the Germans would have not declared war on America like they did in our.
As much as America doesn't like to view it this way, if Hitler had declared war on America, he goes, like, it would have fought Germany. Probably Hitler did it. Get support from the Japanese and the Americans as a dangerous foe, viewing them as racially inferior due to miscegenation. Yeah, but at the same time, it had a huge amount of Germans, so he probably gave like the compliment there. I love your Germans. I hate everyone else though.
Timeline. The US would likely not fight a war against the Japanese
U.S.
because,
declares war.
since the Netherlands are surrounded by Germany, it seems highly likely the Netherlands would be a German puppet state. The main source of oil in the Far East comes from Indonesia, which was a Dutch colony. Since the Germans and Japanese would likely be allies, if the US passed an anti-trade deal against Japan, the Germans in Indonesia would likely have ignored it, and Japan would not feel the need to declare war on America for oil. The Japanese would likely seize Malaysia, a British colony, but would expend most of their energies into the conquest of China.
Japan, I feel, with Britain and France kind of being so weak and basically gone, and with all these lands, just so vulnerable, especially with the Dutch too. In my opinion, I think Japan probably just conquers them all. Like, they just take everything. They become extremely powerful, in my opinion. Japan has a very good opportunity. However, I think they just have to be really careful. I don't really know what else. Like, I just know Japan probably gets a lot of land. Oh, why is that 2 times speed? I gotta fix that.
As many numerically inferior invaders like the Mongols and Manchus were able to do when China was disorganized. However, it seems likely that, like all these regimes, a less racist and ideological Japanese occupying force would have assimilated the Chinese culture over several generations. Meanwhile, to jump to another front, the Soviets were so brutal that the amount of collaborators in our timeline who worked with the Germans, especially early in the war, was quite large. However, they quickly realized the Nazis were worse than the communists. This would
Yeah.
not be the case in this timeline, with the Kaiser much more humane than the Nazis, leading to a lack of morale among the Russian defenders. European Russia would likely collapse and become a German.
So we got the Soviet Union just gone. The Reich likely with many puppets. Then we just got Turkey, Finland. Yeah, Finland looking thick, man. The Volga Confederacy. Oof. And then Japan might take advantage of Russia's weakness. Yeah, probably they would do that. Japan's gonna like pick off the leftovers.
Satellite. Some Soviets would flee east of the Urals and create a communist regime in Siberia. Europe would likely develop like this after the war. The Germans would crush the British and French.
Yeesh, Germany looking thick, man. I I don't know what to say. That just looks so beautiful to look at. Next, there's like look at this. Comparing Germany, this ginormous country, to like Austria-Hungary, it just looks so tiny. All these little baby countries, and then look at this. Imagine something all that to crush France. Like, that's massive. I don't know if they could even get all that. It's just big, man.
Being able to turn European Russia into a satellite. They would likely try to exploit Europe for Germany's benefit, while at the same time not infuriating the European powers enough for them to not cooperate. Thus, they would create a sort of European Union of mutual cooperation based out of any of the cities the EU is based out of in our timeline for geographic reasons, with Germany as the presiding power.
If I cared enough to incur the wrath of my European fans, I would make some smarky remark then.
Asia would turn into a Japanese imperium, becoming a more benign version of the East Asian co-prosperity sphere. I have no idea what would occur with decolonization. The United States would have fought in neither World War. It would have remained an isolationist power, which the US is honestly capable of doing due to its incredible geographic advantages. Except for Latin America, of course. The US will intervene there. Once Britain would become part of the
I feel so bad for Latin America.
Of course.
Look at this. I feel so bad. Like, man, they have to go through all that crap, man.
The US will intervene there. Once Britain would become part of the German-European Union, the ex-British settler societies like Australia, Canada, or New Zealand would immediately become American allies. The world would in general look like this. Some people...
Nah. Australia, get out of here. We don't want Australia. Canada, maybe. But you can't be so left-leaning. You gotta chill out, bro.
People say that a world in which the central powers in one World War I would be better. I'm not sure. There are strengths and weaknesses to both worlds. What do you think? Is this a...
Yes, I think this would be a better world.
I'm not sure we live in. What if autists and think...
Wait, what do you say?
What do you think? Is this a better or worse world than the one we live in? What...
Okay, well, first off, we wouldn't have any, like... Just... I can't even say it, otherwise I'm gonna get in trouble with, like, you know... I don't know, you two might get mad. I don't think they really care, though. I'm just gonna say it, like... Stuff like the drag shows towards kids, the weird, gross things that people are doing to try and get close to little children, you know, pedophile movements. I've seen that a lot on the internet, you know, and just the stupidity and awful and evilness of, like, what man has been doing to our world and the poison California has been doing. Honestly, maybe I would consider liking the German world better. And if you think, oh, but isn't, you know, death, this huge amounts of death and maybe probably a little more racist world worse, well, let me ask you this. How do you feel about what happened in the Middle East? I mean, we're just as inhumane as what the Germans did back in World War One. Worse, actually. Think about this. Look what the U.S. government did. They funded groups that literally were committing genocide to innocent kids in Yemen. Everyone's evil. I think that it definitely has its setbacks. Like, Japan probably would be very, very harsh and tough dictatorship and probably would be a little more oppressive. Germany would definitely be a little more of a racist country. The world would be way more racist and anti-Semitic. But look on the bright side, at least over time, they will be better integrated. The reason why racism happened was because they didn't know blacks until they integrate with the culture. When you have someone outside the culture, it kind of creates that, makes them look outside and then, you know, like an outsider of the region of the society. But as over time they integrate more and more, it does make it better. So as long as they're able to do that decently, I think we probably would have a better world. Yeah, and that's kind of the end.
What if autists, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed that timeline, please like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.
Man, I love What If Voltis. He's awesome.
Alternatively, check out Buddy Panda's YouTube channel by clicking. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, so in my opinion, yeah, he's pretty cool. He makes really good content. You gotta check out What If Voltis more. And yeah, that's kind of the end. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.